Welcome to the Drowsy Historian, where we uncover the grimy, pungent, and occasionally absurd truths that your history teacher politely left out. Today, we're dragging you nose first into the heart of a medieval Spanish market. Not the postcard version with cheerful tambourines and olive oil tastings. No, we're talking real medieval Spain, before coffee, before soap, and definitely before human rights. So, let's set the scene. It's 4:00 a.m. in the bustling Castilian town of Ávila, sometime around the 1300s. You think you're up early, but you're already late. Market life starts before the sun dares peek over the hills, and trust us, the smells beat it to the punch. It hits you in the face the moment you step out. Human waste, horse manure, rotting cabbage, yesterday's fish bones, unwashed armpits, and blood copious, sticky blood. The stalls aren't even up yet, but the butchers are already sharpening blades that haven't been cleaned since last summer. At the corner of a crooked alley, you meet Domingo, a wiry, leather-faced mule handler who sells dried figs, sometimes legally. He's already 3 sips deep into sour wine because wine was safer than water, and cursing at his mule, which seems to have more dignity than half the town. Domingo's been up since 2030, boiling down goat hooves to sell as soup starter. Rich in collagen. Also rich in botulism. You try not to gag. Good luck with that. Now let's talk logistics. These markets weren't organised rows of curated produce and artisan baskets. They were free-for-alls. Vendors claimed spots by seniority, bribery, or brute force. If you're new here, like Domingo's apprentice Mateo, a poor boy orphaned during a famine and now running errands for stale bread crusts, you get kicked. Literally, out of any shadow of shade you try to claim. Mateo's job is to carry buckets of pig intestines to the offal pile. A glorious mountain of bile-coloured waste, swarming with flies so thick they sound like applause. Nearby, a man sells boiled sheep heads from a barrel. Eyeballs float like dumplings, and yes, they're extra. You may be wondering, how is anyone not dead yet? Good question. Many are. In fact, the market doubles as a recruiting ground for death itself. The average life expectancy in medieval Spain hovered around 30. Childhood diseases, tetanus from a rusty nail or a bad oyster, could take you out before your second molar came in. And if you were lucky enough to make it to adulthood, well, congratulations. You now get to dodge swinging cleavers, cat-sized rats, and open sewer trenches cleverly disguised as drainage. Oh, and let's not forget the animals. Chickens peck at everything, including corpses. Dogs drag limbs that might have once been human. Pigs, ironically the cleanest of the lot, are occasionally seen rooting through ash piles looking for scraps of burnt bread or bone. If you're vegetarian, you're already halfway to starvation. By 6:00 a.m, the chaos is fully awake. No permits, no regulations. A scrawny man in a robe tries to sell a miracle elixir made of honey, vinegar, and powdered bat testicles. He calls it El Cura de Todo, the cure for everything. Ironically, it often causes the worst thing, trust. Trust was lethal in these markets. That, and touching anything without gloves, which didn't exist, by the way. Let's take a quick detour to the public latrines, which is a generous term. Really, it's just a slanted slab with a hole and a wooden bucket that hasn't been emptied since the reign of Alfonso X then. Men grunt beside goats. Women squat behind canvas bales, and everything flows. Yes, flows down to the lower alleys where the bakers work. Nothing like fresh bread baked beside sewage steam. You might ask, wasn't there any regulation? Technically, yes. A market inspector, known as the Vida, did rounds, checking weights and punishing cheaters. But he was usually drunk, or bribed, or both. His main job was pretending to sniff meat and nod wisely. Meanwhile, stalls selling spoiled eels or 3-day-old poultry just moved their carts 2 streets over when complaints rolled in. Now don't get us wrong. The medieval market wasn't all death and pestilence. It had its charms. Live music, played poorly on cracked flutes, travelling monks reciting sermons with terrifying accuracy, and gossip. Oh, the gossip. There's no TikTok in 1320, so the market was the feed, the reel, the trending tab. People came for produce and stayed for scandal. Did you hear about Maria who sold lentils mixed with pebbles? Or the butcher who used dog meat during Lent? Outrage was common, but consequences were not. The marketplace was a swirling mess of supply, demand, superstition, and survival. And speaking of survival, remember Matteo? He just got elbowed in the eye by a noblewoman's servant. Why? Because he looked at her dog, for too long. Social hierarchy was more sacred than saints, and a misplaced glance could mean lashes. Or worse, public humiliation, which we'll explore in a later chapter when we get to stocks and scorn. For now, be grateful you're just visiting. The market doesn't want you. You're soft. You wear shoes. You still believe fresh means safe. Go ahead, bite into that plum from the fruit vendor near the latrine. Hope you enjoy your next 3 days in a hay-padded corner with explosive dysentery. And still, medieval people called this life. As the sun climbs higher, so does the heat. And with it, the smells ferment into something unspeakable. If you thought the early morning stench was unbearable, brace yourself. The sun doesn't just rise, it cooks. By midday, Ávila's market becomes a human stew. The cobblestones grow slick with a mix of animal grease, sweat, spilled ale, and who knows what else. You could skate across it if you didn't mind losing a few teeth in the fall. Let's follow Domingo again. By now, he's already sold 1/3 of his figs, some to real customers, others bartered for a clay jug of goat milk that tastes suspiciously like feet. His shirt is soaked, his boots are splitting, and a suspicious red welt is growing on his arm from where a flea took liberties. Matteo, the boy, trails behind him with a sack of limp parsley and cracked eggs. He's dizzy, but he keeps going. That's what poor boys did, keep going until they drop. Markets in medieval Spain weren't just places to buy food. They were everything. Newsrooms, courthouses, pick-up bars, fight clubs. The local barber, who is also the town surgeon and unofficial dentist, is offering tooth extractions by the fish stall. The tool? Pliers. Sanitized? With a rag and maybe a Hail Mary. Want your hair cut afterward? That'll cost you. But don't worry, the same blade will be used. Beside him, a man with no tongue is ringing a bell and gesturing toward his paintings. Depictions of saints with hands too large and faces too square. He's mute, not by birth, but by punishment. Years ago, he was caught spreading heresy. His sentence, remove the tongue and let the market mock him forever. Harsh, but cheaper than execution. Meanwhile, rich ladies in veils drift past like ghost ships, their perfume clashing with the air around them. They carry silver coins, and behind them follow attendants ready to beat back any merchant foolish enough to make eye contact. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't stand too close. And never ever look like you're enjoying yourself. Joy was for nobles. You, peasant, were born to endure. Not that all peasants did. Every so often, a scuffle breaks out. Someone accused of watering down wine, of cheating weights, of stealing a crust of bread. The crowd loves it. They jeer, they shove, they throw onion skins. Market violence wasn't just tolerated, it was expected. You weren't really part of society until you'd been punched over a wheel of cheese. Critics of the time, yes, even the medieval world had them, often wrote that marketplaces were where morals went to die. A den of thieves and whores, one monk scribbled in his letters. He wasn't wrong. Brothels weren't far from the market square, and many worked double shifts, selling cherries by day, selling something else entirely by night. The lines were blurred, especially for survival. Yet, despite all this, despite the rot, the filth, the danger, there was pride in it. Domingo brags to Matteo that he once sold figs to a travelling duke. Matteo gasps like he met the Pope. Reputation mattered here, so did alliances. A nearby fishmonger gives Domingo a nod, meaning he'll watch Domingo spot while he urinates behind a cart. It's trust, medieval style. But if Domingo takes too long, that same fishmonger will swipe his best produce without blinking. That's just the code. No contracts, no receipts, no returns. Only memory and muscle. And once you're old or sick or weak, the market forgets you ever existed. The wooden carts keep rolling. The shouts grow louder, and new blood fills your space before your body's even cold. As midday bells ring, the market sizzles. Baskets of grapes ferment in the sun. A man collapses from heatstroke. Nobody notices. Matteo fans himself with a cabbage leaf, watching a street performer swallow fire and nearly ignite his own beard. The crowd roars. Somewhere, a baby cries. Somewhere else, a rat is stomped. This is normal. And you, poor outsider with your sanitized life and romantic notions of rustic Europe, would last all of 10 minutes. You'd faint at the sight of a blood-slicked cleaver. You'd scream when a pig nipped your heel. You'd curse the sun, the crowd, the chaos, then realize there's no one to help. No 911, no bottled water. Just you, your nose, and a thick wave of human misery. Still dreaming of time travel? Because here's the kicker. You haven't even seen the real danger yet. You haven't met the tax collector. Or the church's enforcers. You haven't stumbled into the public punishments, the bread riots, the random fires. That comes later. For now, just hold your breath and try not to step in anything. Chapter 2. The Butcher's Brutality. Step aside from the produce stalls and dried fig dealers for a moment, because now we're heading into the bloodiest part of the market. If you were hoping this would be the gourmet section, with cuts of tender lamb and artisan charcuterie, think again. Welcome to the meat quarter of a medieval Spanish market. A shrieking, splattering horror show where cleavers fly and health codes come to die. Now, if your stomach's already uneasy, you might want to look away. But of course you can't, because this section isn't tucked away in some back alley. No, it's front and centre, right by the cathedral steps, where blood runs in thin red rivulets across the stones. Because nothing screams divine harmony like the scent of raw liver baking in the sun. The first thing that hits you isn't the sight, it's the sound. Pigs squealing, cattle groaning, cleavers thudding, bones cracking, men shouting, flies buzzing so loud it's practically orchestral. Over all of it, vendors bark prices while elbowing one another for space. There are no gloves, no aprons. Just hands, calloused, unwashed, bloody hands, hacking, yanking, and tossing meat around like yesterday's laundry. Enter Butcher Alonso, a man with the shoulders of an ox and the hygiene of a compost pile. He's been running this stall for over a decade, which makes him a market veteran. His nose is crooked from an old price dispute, his thumb missing, bitten off by a boar he was too drunk to slaughter properly. Alonso doesn't mind. He just sharpens his cleaver, spits, and waves customers forward with the kind of charm only a half-blind man with a belly full of wine can muster. Today, Alonso is cutting up a sheep. Not just any sheep. A half-rotted one he got at a discount from a farm dealing with a mysterious illness. No one cares, or rather, they pretend not to. The poor can't afford care. The rich send servants. And the church? Well, they bless the meat stalls during certain feast days, so that must count for something. Right? Alonso's assistant, a trembling teen named Julien, tries not to gag as he scrapes congealed fat off a bloodboard. His job is simple. Keep the bones in one pile, organs in another, and everything else, well, just toss that under the table. The dogs will take care of it. Julien dreams of being a stonemason. But his uncle owed Alonso money, and now here he is, up to his ankles in entrails. You might ask, why so brutal? Why not chill the meat, store it properly, clean the surfaces? Simple, none of that exists. There is no refrigeration, no stainless steel, no inspections, unless the Vida's being bribed or bored. Meat was slaughtered in the morning, sold by noon, eaten by dusk, or else it became part of the street's growing microbial zoo. Salt curing existed, yes. Smoking too. But that was for professionals, not your average open-air market. For most townsfolk, today's meat was yesterday's animal, and if it smelled a little odd, just throw it in a stew with garlic and call it penance. Let's talk about prices. You'd think spoiled meat would be cheap. It was, to a point, but demand still outpaced supply. The poor didn't buy ribs or chops. They bought offal intestines, liver, kidneys, feet, lungs, brains, whatever remained after the noble parts were taken. And here's the kicker. Sometimes those scraps cost more than clean bread, because protein was scarce and prestige mattered. Serving your family half a heart was still better than another dinner of boiled turnips. And what about the animals? Oh, they're not killed off-site. That would be far too sanitary. No, they're slaughtered on the spot, often in front of their fellows. Chickens scream before the blade lands, sheep whimper, pigs squeal so loud it rattles the teeth. You may not speak their language, but you understand their terror. Children watch, women wince, men pretend it's normal, because here it is. By now, Alonso's cleaver slips and slices his palm. He doesn't stop. He just wipes the blood on his shirt and keeps going. Julian doesn't even flinch anymore. A year ago he cried when a goat bled out in his arms. Today he pulls maggots from a cow's tongue like it's part of the recipe. And amidst this carnage, irony thrives. The church often banned meat on Fridays and during Lent. But did you think that stopped the butcher's stall? Of course not. They just sold it in whispers, behind curtains, calling it Pilgrim's Fare or Holy Stock. The clergy even bought some themselves. No one asked questions. No one wanted answers. Hypocrisy was as common as fleas. Still want to live here? Think you'd survive your weekly grocery run? Consider this. One cut of bad meat could kill a child. One slip of the cleaver could maim for life. One shouted insult to the wrong butcher could land you face first in the offal pile. And yet, these stalls never emptied. Because despite it all, this was life. Necessary, brutal, raw life, sold by the kilo. And don't worry, we haven't even gotten to the cheese stall yet. Midday sun pours down like molten glass, and the butchers of Ávila's market are deep into their blood-soaked routines. Alonso, with his missing thumb and permanently blood-stained apron, is now moved from sheep to pigs. The air is thick with the stench of boiling fat, spoiled organs, and something worse, something that no one quite identifies, but everyone smells. It clings to your hair, your clothes, even your teeth. In this market, soap is a rumour, and rot is a reality. His assistant Julian scrubs at a wooden slab with a cloth so old and stiff it might as well be leather. No soap, no vinegar, just cold water drawn from a bucket that's also been used to soak hooves and rinse knives. The cleaning process here is like using a dirty sock to wipe off a crime scene. It doesn't help. It just spreads the story around. Let's take a step back and talk about regulation. Technically, medieval Spain had rules about meat-selling edicts passed down from kings or local councils, outlining what could be sold and how. But these laws were largely ignored, unless someone important got sick or someone poor got caught. Alonso had once been fined for selling ox meat during a swine shortage, but he paid the fine in sausages and the matter vanished. That's how enforcement worked, flexible, corrupt, and highly edible. Now, here's where it gets darker. Disease didn't just float in from rats or bad bread, it oozed from these very stalls. Anthrax, known as wool sorter's disease, spread from handling infected animal hides. Brucellosis, caught by eating raw or undercooked meat, led to fevers, sweats, and in some cases death. And let's not forget trichinosis, a lovely little gift from improperly cooked pork, which caused cramps, vomiting, and muscle pain. Of course, most people just thought they were cursed or had sinned too much. Which, to be fair, in these markets was almost always true. On the other side of the blood ditch, an old woman named Isabel tries to sell dried sausages from a straw basket. She's toothless, nearly blind, and smells of lavender oil she makes herself from boiled weeds. Her sausages are mostly fat, sometimes rat, but she's proud of them. Once a noblewoman bought 3. Isabel tells everyone. It's the highlight of her decade. As she waves a fly away with a chicken feather, a dispute breaks out 2 stalls down. A customer, furious at a slab of beef that smells worse than a latrine pit, throws it back at the vendor. The vendor, young, angry, and holding a cleaver, throws it right back. The meat hits a monk in the face. For a moment the square goes silent. Then someone laughs. Then another. And then the monk joins in, because what else can you do when covered in cow slime and shame? This is how the market polices itself. Not with order, but with spectacle. Of course, the danger isn't always accidental. Rival butchers occasionally sabotage one another, salting each other's meat too heavily, poisoning water buckets, even hiring thieves to steal carts in the night. Alonso had a brother once, a butcher too, who disappeared after an argument with a rival family. They found his knife belt in the river. No one asked questions. The meat business was serious business. But even in this brutal world, social rank mattered. The nobles and clergy bought from approved stalls, vendors who paid the most bribes or kissed the right rings. Alonso, despite his age and reputation, wasn't on that list. He sold to the poor, the desperate, the drunk. He knew his place and he embraced it. Julian, meanwhile, dreamed of more, maybe working in a castle kitchen, away from flies and mud. But everyone knew that dream was just that. Dreams didn't survive long in the meat quarter. As afternoon shadows stretch long, the pace slows. The butcher's cleaver grows dull, his grip lazy. Julian's arms ache from carrying buckets of bones and wiping down benches that will never be clean. Blood cakes under his nails. His tunic smells like death. Still, he says nothing. Complaints earn slaps. Hesitation earns worse. One time, Alonso caught him resting and dragged him by the collar through a pool of blood to remind him what work is. Lesson learned. Across the square, a man collapses. Heat stroke, maybe. Or tainted meat. No one checks. A few step over him. One kicks his foot to see if he moves. When he doesn't, they call for the undertaker, who shares a cart with the tanner. Because why waste a trip? You might think this is extreme, exaggerated, fictionalized. But that's the mistake most make when imagining medieval life. They clean it up. They light candles and wear pretty cloaks and forget the flies, the screams, the hot stinking meat air that sticks in your throat like a ghost. This was the market. This was the norm. And the worst part? People preferred it to rural life. Compared to the isolation of the fields, the back-breaking slavery of serfdom, the market offered choices, even if they were all bad. You could die under a cart or under a noble's boot, but at least here you had the illusion of picking which. Still think you'd last a day here? Really, wait until we visit the spice vendors. Spoiler, half their spices are dirt. Chapter 3, Peddlers and Pickpockets. If you've survived the meat quarter dodging bloody cleavers, sidestepping gut puddles, and resisting the urge to vomit every 5 minutes, congratulations. You've earned the right to enter the next ring of hell, the Peddler's Alley. A stretch of chaos so loud, so dishonest, so bewilderingly frantic that it makes the butcher's stall seem almost quaint. This is where the noise grows. Teeth. The lies wear perfume, and your coin purse grows wings. Here, the walls seem to close in. Canvas tarps flap in the breeze, blocking the sky. Voices shout from every direction. Children run between legs. Someone's singing. Someone's swearing. Someone's weeping. The smells change too, from raw flesh to hot wax, garlic oil, perfumed cloth, burning tallow, and occasionally human waste. Again. This part of the market isn't just crowded, it's dangerous. You think you're here to shop. Wrong. You're here to be studied, measured, and relieved of your belongings. Let us introduce Esteban, a wiry man with a grin as crooked as his morals. Esteban sells miracle oils, snake balms, love powders, and healing, stones that he found near the river and painted with chicken blood. He calls himself a healer, a prophet, and a master of the Eastern arts, though he's never been east of Toledo. His voice is a weapon, cutting through the crowd like a dagger. Cure your bowels. Fix your marriage. Warts vanish in seconds. People gather. Of course they do. Suffering is universal, and hope is cheap. He holds up a vial of golden liquid. One drop under your tongue and the demons run. For pain, for lust, for justice. He says it cured a duke's daughter. He says it revived a man after drowning. What's in the bottle? Olive oil. Maybe some honey. A hair or two. Doesn't matter. It sells. Now Esteban isn't alone. Dozens like him line the path, each with their own gimmick. One juggles knives while selling copper bracelets. Another lets you test dice that are conveniently weighted. One woman pretends to read fortunes, reciting vague nonsense while her daughter slips behind you and loosens your purse strings. You laugh. She smiles. Your coins vanish. And let's not forget the children. Not sweet, innocent children, market children. Packs of sharp-eyed, dirt-faced orphans trained in distraction and theft. They spill apples in your path, then slip their fingers into your sleeves. They pretend to cry. They pretend to need help. One tugs your sleeve while the other lifts your pouch. You won't even feel it go. This isn't pickpocketing. This is performance art, and it's been perfected over centuries. Even Alonzo the butcher knows not to walk through this alley with anything loose. He keeps his coins in a pouch tied to his armpit and his blade tucked behind his belt. Julian learned this the hard way. Last spring, he lost his entire week's earnings to a girl with a cough and a handful of fake bread. Justice? Ha! Don't make me laugh. There's no guard patrol in the Peddlers' alley. The alguacil, the town constable, avoids this place like the plague, partly because it smells like one, and partly because half his family works here. Corruption isn't a bug in the system. It's the feature. Occasionally, someone makes a scene. A farmer shouts that he's been robbed. A noble screams about missing rings. The crowd parts. A man is accused. He protests. He's beaten anyway. Guilty or not, the public loves a beating. Esteban sells double on those days. And here's the twist. Some pickpockets are sponsored. By whom? The local merchant guilds. It's simple. If the guild needs leverage over a rival or wants someone handled quietly, a whisper to the alley is all it takes. The right purse disappears, the right documents vanish. Coin is transferred. No blood, no noise, just business. Still feeling clever? Think you'd spot a scam? Let's test you. You walk up to a smiling vendor selling Arabic sugar. White, powdery, sweet-smelling. He lets you taste it. It's divine. You buy a whole pouch. What you don't know, the sample was sugar. The pouch? Pulverized limestone and goat lard. Enjoy your kidney stones. Or you see silk from the Orient, shimmering and delicate. Beautiful. The price? Absurdly low. You snatch it up. 3 days later, it dissolves in the rain. Turns out, it's spider silk mixed with pig gut, polished with egg yolk. Authentic as Esteban's moral compass. What's worse, people know this. And they still buy. Why? Because hope sells. Because people want to believe in miracles, even if they come wrapped in lies, and because, frankly, there's no one else to trust. In the middle of all this madness stands an old woman named Catalina, selling roasted almonds. She's real. Her nuts are good. Her price is fair. She's been here for 30 years and has watched it all unfold. She says nothing, just nods at Esteban and slips a few almonds to a hungry child. You might think she's a saint. She's not. She poisons rats for a fee on the side. Afternoon deepens, and with it the peddlers grow bolder. The sun has baked the alley into a cauldron of desperation, where mirages of opportunity flicker in every corner. Shouts bounce off stone walls like spells. Golden dates, straight from Damascus. Miraculous powder, just one sniff and you'll dance like a Moor. A relic of St. James, guaranteed to cure the plague. That last one is a chicken bone soaked in wine. Now, you might wonder, how do these sellers get away with it? Simple, everyone knows. Everyone wants to be fooled. The medieval Spanish market wasn't a place for logic, it was theatre. Spectacle. Illusion for sale. And everyone, from beggar to bishop, played along, because in a life where truth was cruel and short-lived, fantasy lasted longer. Let's take a closer look at Esteban, the oily-tongued fraudster we met earlier. He's mid-pitch now, holding a shriveled root he claims was pulled from a Moorish grave and blessed by 12 saints. Rub this on your chest before bed, he insists, and your enemies will weep blood. A woman gasps. A man buys 2. Esteban grins, pockets the coin, and swaps in another root, this one freshly dug from beside the latrine. Nearby, a dwarf juggles rotting apples while singing bawdy songs. He isn't just an entertainer, he's a signal. When he sings off-key, it means the alguacil is approaching. When he juggles 5 apples instead of 4, it means a fight is about to break out. He's being paid by 3 rival pickpocket gangs to keep the peace by ruining it just enough. Speaking of pickpockets, let's follow a boy named Rafa. He's 12, barefoot, skin darkened by sun and soot. He looks like a beggar, which is precisely the point. Rafa's not here to plead, he's here to hunt. He spots a merchant's wife examining spices and sees her purse dangle just a little too far from her belt. He shuffles closer, pretending to cry. In his hand, a cooked rat on a stick. He offers it to her. She recoils. And in that exact moment, her purse disappears. She doesn't even notice. Rafa darts into the crowd, tosses the coins to a man chewing cloves, and vanishes. The man, Esteban's cousin. The cloves, a cover for the stink of guilt. The coins, already gone, traded for bread, wine, and part of a mule hoof market currency at its finest. It would be romantic to imagine these children as victims forced into crime by poverty. And yes, poverty plays its part. But make no mistake, Rafa is proud, skilled, quick. In another world, he'd be a surgeon or a spy. Here, he's just another cog in the marketplace's unofficial economy, a web of theft, barter, and mutual betrayal. Now and then, the market tries to resist. A merchant posts a sign, "Thieves will lose their hands." Bold words. Empty threat. The only hands getting lost here are from the butcher's table. Justice, if it comes at all, is a performance. A thief caught red-handed is dragged to the square, paraded, slapped, maybe branded. Then, if he survives, he's back the next day, now with a crowd that knows his face. Reputation, even criminal, is a form of branding. Let's shift back to Catalina, the almond seller. Still sitting, still silent, still roasting her nuts over a coals pan she inherited from her grandmother. Her booth is small, but respected. Even the pickpockets leave her alone. Why? Because Catalina knows everything. Who paid off whom? Which priest sleeps where? Who stole which mule and sold it to whose cousin? She's the market's memory. And memory in a place like this is power. Once, a knight tried to swindle her, said her almonds were wormy, demanded she give him more for free. Catalina didn't argue. She just slipped a note into his pouch that read, "I know what you did in Salamanca." He turned white, paid double, never returned. No one knows what it meant, that's the point. So why doesn't she leave? Why not retire, escape, live out her years in a quiet vineyard? Because she owns this chaos, and chaos is loyal. But don't be fooled into thinking there's honour here. The market's unwritten rules shift like sand. Today's ally is tomorrow's rival. Esteban once shared a stall with his cousin. They laughed, drank, scammed pilgrims together. Then one day Esteban accused him of selling fake relics with his branding. A knife fight broke out. Esteban won, barely. The cousin? Buried near the offal pile. No one asked questions. Critics of the time, scholars, priests, and sour-faced bishops railed against markets like these. They called them dens of vice, nests of heresy, places where the devil himself wore a money belt. And honestly, they weren't wrong, but they were also missing the point. These markets weren't broken. They were alive, organic, evolving, governed not by law, but by need. Want clean food? Grow your own. Want honesty? Pray for it. Want safety? Stay home. But if you want to live, truly live, among smells, sounds, curses, laughter, theft, seduction, danger, and almonds, you come to the market, and you watch your purse. Chapter 4. Taxman and the Church's Cut. Just when you think you've figured out the medieval Spanish market, dodged the cleavers, survived the scams, clutched your coin purse tight, another figure emerges from the crowd, wearing not blood nor rags, but velvet. Clean, quiet, smiling. This isn't a butcher, or a peddler, or a thief. This is the tax collector, and make no mistake, he's more dangerous than all three. His name is Don Ramiro, and unlike Esteban the fraudster or Alonso the butcher, Ramiro doesn't shout, he doesn't bargain, he doesn't even carry a weapon, he doesn't need to. He walks with the confidence of a man whose threats are legally binding and morally blessed. His scroll of market levies is longer than a cow's intestines, and it's signed by the local corregidor, stamped by the bishop, and enforced by the town's handful of soldiers. You might think taxation in the Middle Ages was simple. A small fee here, a little tithe there. Wrong. It was a Byzantine labyrinth of charges, tolls, fines and fees, most of which seemed designed solely to make poor people suffer and rich people smirk. You paid to sell, you paid to buy. You paid to set up a stall, you paid to move your cart. You even paid for the shade your cart cast on the cobblestones. Yes, shade tax was real. Don Ramiro collects all of it. He stops at Alonso's stall. "Ah, Señor Alonso," he coos, "the blood tax." Alonso grumbles and forks over 3 copper coins. Ramiro frowns. "Inflation," he says softly. "It's 4 now," Alonso protests. Ramiro shrugs. "Would you prefer I ask the bishop to examine your meats for divine contamination?" Alonso, now red-faced and flecked with sweat, silently hands over another coin. Across the alley, Esteban the peddler hides behind his tent. He hasn't paid the stall fee in 2 months, and he's hoping Ramiro forgets. He won't, but he'll let it slide this week. Why? Because Esteban slips him a little healing powder now and then, the kind that makes your feet go numb and your sins feel far away. Market taxes may be listed on parchment, but in practice they're fluid, negotiable, transactional. Then there's Catalina, the almond seller. She doesn't pay in coin, she pays in information. Last week she warned Ramiro about a rival taxman sniffing around from Segovia. This week she casually mentions that the fishmonger's scales are rigged. In return, her stall remains untouched. Not even the alguacil bothers her. Power, as always, lies not in muscle but in what you know. But let's not forget the real heavyweight in all this, the church. The church doesn't need to argue. It doesn't need a list of taxes. It has one phrase that trumps everything. It is the will of God. Tithes, mandatory donations of 1/10 of your earnings, aren't optional. Even the poorest farmer, selling 2 sacks of onions, is expected to cough up 1 sack for the church. Never mind that the church owns half the land already. Never mind that the bishop rides a horse fed better than most infants. The tithe is sacred. To withhold it is to court eternal damnation, or, worse, public penance. The church's men don't wear weapons either. They wear robes and sandals and smug little smiles. One such man, Fray Hernando, walks the market holding a silver staff with a wooden cross. He doesn't ask. He simply points. "That cart," he says, "tithe, that jar of olives, that goat, that boy's shoes." People comply. They don't argue. Because arguing with Fray Hernando means arguing with God. And God, conveniently, doesn't accept excuses, only offerings. Criticism, of course, existed. Quiet grumblings in taverns. Sharp jokes traded under breath. The taxman eats better than the king, some say. The bishop drinks wine while Christ drank water, others mutter. But these words were like smoke, easy to spot, easy to crush. One wrong sentence could land you in the stocks, or worse, labelled a heretic. And heretics? Well, let's just say the church had creative ways of encouraging confession. Even children weren't safe. Julian, Alonso's apprentice, once earned 2 extra coppers and tried to hide one. When the tithe collector found out, Julian was dragged to the church steps and made to kneel for 6 hours, holding a stone over his head. "Penance for greed," the priest said. Never mind that the priest wore silk. Never mind that his boots were cleaner than most soles. God's will was unquestionable. Let's be clear. This wasn't taxation for roads or sanitation or education. There were no roads. The market was paved with dirt, spit and prayers. There was no sanitation. A dead dog lay rotting behind the apothecary's tent for 3 days before someone moved it. Education? If you could read, you were suspicious. If you could write, you were dangerous. So where did the taxes go? They went to banquets, to cathedral construction, to gold-threaded vestments and ivory crosses. They went to fund sermons condemning greed, delivered by men who hadn't emptied their own chamber pots in years. And yet, people paid, willingly, fearfully, because in medieval Spain, to defy the church or the taxman was to defy reality. You didn't rebel, you suffered quietly. You watched the collectors walk away with your coins and told yourself it was holy. You bled and told yourself it was fair, because the alternative was unthinkable. The afternoon heat has now ripened into a choking stillness, and yet Don Ramiro, ever the velvet vulture, continues his rounds. The man barely sweats, gliding across filth-slicked cobbles like a saint of extortion. Each step of his polished boots speaks of authority, unearned, unquestioned, and, most of all, unavoidable. But don't let his calm demeanour fool you. He may not swing a sword or boil a cauldron, but his power is more terrifying. He can ruin you with ink. He pauses at a fish seller's stall. Eels, he says, pinching one between two fingers like a lady holding a rat. Have you paid the salt levy? The woman selling them frowns. But I caught them myself. Ramiro raises an eyebrow. And did you salt them for the journey from the river? She hesitates. He smiles. Then the salt tax applies. 4 maravedis. She curses under her breath and pays. He marks her parchment with a flourish that might as well be a death sentence. Yes, you heard right, a tax on salt. Why? Because salt preserved meat, and preserved meat meant survival. So naturally the Crown decided it should cost extra. Want to transport goods? Pay the bridge toll. Want to sell wool? Pay the fleece duty. Want to even open your mouth in the market square? Technically that's covered by a noise regulation fee, although no one's paid it because no one believes it's real. Yet, meanwhile, Fray Hernando, the church's smiling blade, approaches the linen stall where a mother and daughter huddle behind bolts of sun-bleached fabric. Tithe, he says gently, like a butcher asking a lamb if it minds the knife. The mother offers him a hand-woven kerchief embroidered with shaky red thread, clearly her best work. Hernando examines it, nods approvingly, and pockets it without a word. Then he takes 2 more. For the poor, he explains, while adjusting his gilded belt. You might be thinking, surely someone fights back. Surely some poor fool refuses to pay. They do. Once. A few years ago, a melon seller named Gaspar had had enough. He screamed at Don Ramiro in the middle of the square, flung a rotten fruit at his head, and declared he would rather die than surrender another copper. The market froze. A few even clapped. It was a glorious moment, until the alguacil arrived. Gaspar spent 3 days in the stocks, chained by the ankles, pelted with everything from dung to old bread. On the 4th day, the bishop himself came by and offered him absolution, if Gaspar confessed his greed. He did. Then he vanished. His stall was taken over by his cousin, who now pays twice the tax in honour of Gaspar's memory. Moral of the story? Resistance is theatrical, brief, and almost always punished. Even Catalina, the unflinching almond seller, is not above the system. Once a month she offers Fray Hernando a sealed pouch of sugared almonds. For the children, she says. Everyone knows the children won't see a single nut, but it buys her silence. And in this market, silence is as valuable as gold. And the corruption doesn't stop there. Oh no. See, Don Ramiro and Fray Hernando may seem like opposing forces, secular and sacred. But in truth, they're partners in the grand dance of medieval extortion. Ramiro ensures the town's books show pious compliance. Hernando ensures the town's souls fear divine consequence. Between them, they've built an empire of guilt, grease, and greed. And here's the true joke, the real punchline of the whole bloody market. The taxes rarely go where they're meant to. The king, he might see a fraction. The church, sure, it builds another tower. But most of it lines the pockets of local lords, bishops, scribes, and middlemen. And middlemen. And middlemen. Like a snake eating itself, the system devours its own logic until nothing remains but ritual and rot. Julian, Alonso's apprentice, once asked where the taxes went. Up, Alonso grunted. Up to the ones who never come down. The boy didn't understand, not fully, but he would. You grow up fast in the market, and all the while pilgrims still trickle in, nobles ride by in silk-lined carriages, and peasants pray beside broken carts. Life grinds on. People pay. People mutter. But mostly they submit. Because to resist is to lose your stall. To lose your stall is to lose your livelihood. And to lose your livelihood, well, the undertaker doesn't tax corpses. Yet, it's funny, isn't it? For all our modern complaints about taxes and bureaucracy, we forget what it really looked like when power was completely unchecked, when coins didn't build hospitals, but bought whips, when charity was mandatory and generosity meant giving everything while smiling through cracked teeth. So, no, you wouldn't last a day here, not because of the filth or the theft or even the blood, but because you'd open your mouth, ask why, and find yourself face down in the mud with a holy man's foot on your back. Chapter 5. The Moorish Influence. Step into the southeastern side of the market and everything changes. Colours sharpen, smells sweeten, voices shift in tone. You've stumbled into the Moorish quarter, though no sign declares it. The silk banners, brassware glinting in the sun, and aromatic clouds of cardamom, saffron, and roasted cumin announce it far louder than words ever could. Here, amidst the chaos of medieval Spain, the legacy of Al-Andalus unfurls like a silken rug rolled out for the curious and the brave. But don't let the beauty fool you. This isn't coexistence. It's tension masked by commerce. Since the 8th century, Muslims, Christians and Jews had lived sometimes together, sometimes apart, in a tangled coexistence that was more strategy than harmony. By the 14th century, the Reconquista had made its teeth well known, but the cultural imprint of centuries of Moorish rule still pulsed beneath the stones of the market. And nowhere was that more visible or contested than here. Let us meet Zayd ibn Bashir, a merchant with hands stained yellow from turmeric and a tongue sharp enough to slice onions. He speaks 5 languages: Castilian, Arabic, Hebrew, Catalan and gold. He sells rare spices, embroidered slippers, incense blocks and perfume oils. His stall is organised, his tent a riot of patterns, and his eyes? Always watching. He's not here for friends, he's here for survival. Zayd's family once owned acres of citrus orchards near Cordoba. Now, reduced by land seizures and Christian edicts, he rents space in this market under conditions that change as often as the weather. Sometimes he's taxed double. Sometimes he's banned from certain corners. Sometimes a priest walks past and spits near his tent. But Zayd smiles anyway, because he knows something they don't. They need him. The Christian nobility may scorn Moorish blood, but they crave Moorish luxury. They want cinnamon for their wine, sandalwood for their wardrobes, silks for their bedrooms, and perfumes for their lovers. And Zayd, he delivers. At a price. Always with a little dig. Careful, Senora. Too much saffron, and even your prayers may turn Moorish. But not all interactions are so civil. That morning, Diego de Haro, a spice competitor from the Christian quarter, accused Zayd of cutting his saffron with marigold petals. Fake goods from a fake Spaniard, he sneered. Zayd responded not with violence but with mockery. And yet, your mother buys my perfume every week. The crowd roared. Diego didn't. He threw a tomato. It missed. Insults like these aren't just personal. They're political. The church, growing ever more paranoid, paints Islamic culture as heretical, dangerous and corrupting. Moorish music, sinful. Moorish poetry, seductive. Moorish medicine, dark magic. Yet behind closed doors, priests sip anise liquor flavoured with seeds bought from Zayd's uncle. Contradictions are the backbone of power. Let's talk about goods for a moment. Moorish merchants like Zayd sell what no one else can: sugar from Granada, alum from Syria, dates from the Levant, dyed cloths in hues unknown to the Christian palate, oils that shimmer like molten gold. You'd think such wealth would bring respect. It brings suspicion. His scales are weighed twice as often. His stalls are searched. His ledger once confiscated for translation, though everyone knew the scribe who took it couldn't read Arabic or numbers. Even Julian, Alonso's apprentice, once wandered past Zayd's stall and stared wide-eyed at the colours. "Never seen cloth like this," he whispered. Zayd smiled and handed him a scrap. "That's what stars feel like," he said. Julian tucked it in his tunic. Later, Alonso burned it. "Keep your Christian chest clean," he barked. Critics of the time, those brave enough to write them, often remarked that Spain's greatness came not from its unity, but its collision. The Moorish legacy brought architecture, medicine, irrigation, literature, and, yes, markets that sold more than spoiled pork and cabbage. But try saying that out loud in the square, and you'd be lucky to avoid a sermon. Or a stabbing. Let's not romanticize this. Moorish merchants lived under constant threat. Every new decree from the crown might revoke their rights, their permits, their very presence. At any moment, the market could turn on them. One rumour of a poisoned spice, one whisper of allegiance to the wrong ruler, and their stall would burn. And yet, they remained, they endured. Because commerce, in the end, was the last true religion here, and gold spoke louder than any creed. Back at his stall, Zaid unrolls a bolt of silk that shimmers like oil in water. A noblewoman gasps. "It looks enchanted," she whispers. Zaid bows. "Only by the hands that wove it." She buys 3 lengths. He counts her coins slowly, deliberately. She doesn't notice. Her fingers trail the silk as if it were sacred. And for a moment, amid the clamour of distrust and the stink of bias, beauty wins, not because it conquers hate, but because it profits from it. As evening creeps into Ávila's market, casting long gold and ash shadows across the muddy cobbles, the Moorish quarter flickers into something even more enchanting and more dangerous. Lanterns are lit early here, not because it's darker, but because they burn better oils. Zaid's own stall glows with soft, perfumed light, while others flicker with sheep tallow and prayers. Around him, vendors lower prices, whispering in Arabic and Catalan, careful not to be heard by the wrong ears. Because now the market isn't just watching, it's listening. Even by medieval standards, the balance here is delicate. One misstep, one careless joke, one frustrated priest too drunk on sacramental wine, and the Moorish quarter could find itself on fire. Again. Because here's the truth. While Moorish merchants were indispensable to the economy, they were equally disposable in politics. Their wealth was envied, their knowledge distrusted, and their religion tolerated, for now, in the same way one might tolerate a wolf chained in the courtyard, useful, exotic, but always one bite away from excommunication. Still, Zaid smiles. He has to. A frown could be mistaken for pride, and pride, if you were a Muslim under Christian rule, was punishable in coin or blood. A customer approaches, a night steward, sniffing arrogantly at a bag of cinnamon. "Is it pure?" he asks. Zaid nods. "Smuggled in through Valencia, untouched." The steward opens the bag, sniffs theatrically, then smirks. "Smells like filth." He drops a coin anyway, light, copper, not even close to the spice's worth. Zaid bows as if it were gold, because refusing would mean slander, and slander spreads like fire in markets starved for gossip. From across the alley, Diego the Christian spice seller watches this exchange. He hates Zaid, not for being dishonest. Diego cheats far more, but for being better. His spices are vibrant, his scales accurate, his words precise. And customers trust him, in that quiet, shame-filled way one trusts a doctor they pretend not to respect. Diego spits on the ground. A statement. Zaid pretends not to notice. But Catalina, the almond seller, does. She watches everything, as always. Later that evening she'll pass word to Zaid. Diego is planning to accuse him of demonic charms, a vague but damning charge that's landed men in stocks for less. Zaid will nod, slip her 2 strips of dried fig, and quietly add 3 extra prayers to his nightly routine. Julian, Alonso's young apprentice, passes by again, pretending not to look at Zaid's rugs. He's been warned once more, and yet something in those patterns, the geometric spirals and impossible symmetry, pulls at him like a secret. "That's Moorish math," Zaid once told him, "made by minds that measure the stars." Julian doesn't understand, but he believes, not in the numbers, but in the beauty. Beauty, of course, is also dangerous. Moorish textiles had become so desirable in Spain that local guilds started banning their sale. Too competitive, they claimed, too seductive. As if colours were a moral failing. As if symmetry tempted good Christians toward hell. One bishop had even ordered all Moorish curtains in his residence removed, only to privately beg Zaid's cousin for more, claiming they cooled the room better than prayer. That's the world Zaid lives in. One of whispered deals, forced humility, and constant recalibration. His goods are adored, his presence tolerated, his identity questioned. He speaks Castilian better than many of the locals. He pays his taxes early. He prays quietly. But he will never be one of them, and he knows it. In the eyes of many, he's a threat, not because of his wares, but because of what he represents. A memory. A reminder of the grandeur of Al-Andalus, of libraries in Cordoba, of surgeons in Seville, of poetry that once echoed from Granada's red towers. Zaid is not just a man, he is proof, and proof is inconvenient. Even his stall is political. The patterns in his fabrics hint at forbidden geometry. The glass vials he sells carry whispers of medicinal science forbidden in Christian scripts. His incense includes ingredients banned by local monks, not because they're toxic, but because they're foreign. Anything not baptized is suspect. Still, he endures. Because his stall isn't just a business, it's a rebellion, not loud, not violent, but persistent, unshakable. The Christian market may clutch its rosaries and mutter beneath its breath, but when it wants saffron, it comes to Zaid, and every time it does, he wins. So no, you wouldn't last a day here either, not because of your lungs, your shoes, or your constitution, but because you've never had to smile while being erased. You've never had to sell truth in teaspoons while pretending it's salt. You've never had to thank a man for spitting near your feet because at least he didn't draw a knife. And yet, Zaid will rise again tomorrow, open his stall, light his lantern, sell his cinnamon, and wait. Because in the Moorish quarter, patience is not a virtue, it's a survival skill. Chapter 6, Scorching Heat and Barefoot Beggars. The sun over medieval Spain does not shine. It attacks. By late morning, it turns the cobbled streets of Ávila's market into griddles. Clay rooftops glow. Metal tools scald fingers. Even the flies, gods of this buzzing ecosystem, seem slower, drunk on fermented blood and melting goat cheese. And you, modern, pampered, under-moisturized you, are about to step into it wearing leather shoes and false confidence. Poor soul. Let's not sugarcoat this, the heat is violent. The marketplace offers no shade, no fans, no icy drinks. Canvas tents droop, their edges burned brown from endless exposure. Wooden carts crack and splinter. And the air? It doesn't move. It hovers hot and oily, thick with the scent of garlic sweat, donkey dung, rotting onions, and dried fish that should have been buried days ago. This is not summer. This is punishment. Now picture trying to navigate this inferno barefoot. Because many do, not by choice, but by poverty. For them, shoes are heirlooms passed down until they disintegrate. Most wear scraps, cloth, straw, sometimes just hope. Their feet are blackened, cracked, blistered beyond recognition. Each step on sunlit stone is a small crucifixion. Among them walks Lucia, a widow with 3 children and a stall that sells wilted herbs no one wants. She once owned land, a husband, even a donkey. Then came the fever, the taxes, the debt. Now she stands barefoot in the heat, clutching sprigs of rosemary that even the goats refuse to nibble. Her youngest clings to her leg, too weak to cry, too hot to think. She hasn't sold a thing in 2 days. Across the alley, Catalina offers her a few almonds, not out of kindness, though she has her moments, but because she knows desperation festers into chaos. Better a mouthful than a hand reaching, she mutters. She's right. Hunger steals reason faster than wine. And speaking of hunger, let's address the beggars. You'll find them sprawled beneath carts, collapsed beside meat stalls, swatting at flies as if they can afford to waste the energy. Children with swollen bellies, old men with no teeth, women clutching empty bowls and muttering prayers so quietly even God would struggle to hear them. Some are missing limbs. Some are missing minds. All are missing mercy. The rich pass by without seeing, literally. They pull their veils low or lift their noses high. Even the clergy, those great champions of charity, toss scraps only when watched. And why wouldn't they? Beggars in this market are considered obstacles, not victims. They slow carts, stink up corners, distract customers. One tax collector even suggested a vagrancy fee, a fine for existing without contributing. Esteban the fraudster, ever opportunistic, once tried selling miracle wafers to the starving. One bite, he claimed, and you'd feel full for a day. The wafers were dried lentil flour and sawdust. The only miracle was that no one throttled him. Yet. Even Julian, young and kind-hearted, has grown numb. He gives when he can. But he's seen fights over mouldy bread. He's watched an old man beaten for stealing a turnip top. Once, a girl stabbed another for a plum pit. Survival doesn't make saints, it makes scavengers. Now, the market does have rules, technically. There's a decree stating beggars must remain along the market's edge, near the latrine trench, far from stalls. But the trench smells like Satan's outhouse, and most beggars prefer a beating to suffocation. So they drift inward, inch by inch, until someone notices. Sometimes they're shooed, sometimes kicked, sometimes worse. One afternoon, a merchant poured boiling water on a boy who reached for a fig. The crowd gasped, then laughed. "Cleans the soul," the merchant joked. The boy screamed for an hour. No one intervened. Why? Because poverty was seen as punishment, proof of divine disfavour. If you were poor, it was because you sinned. If you were begging, it meant God had turned his face. Even the city's water is cruel. There are wells, yes, but many are private. Others charge fees. Clean water costs more than wine, and in this heat, dehydration is as deadly as infection. Lucia once traded her daughter's shoes for a cup of water after the child collapsed. "At least the ground's softer than death," she said. And death, make no mistake, walks the market daily. It doesn't announce itself with scythes or horsemen. It comes quietly through thirst, heat stroke, fever, infected wounds, and fruit laced with mould. Bodies are sometimes left until sunset, removed by a man with a cart who's paid in bread crusts and avoidance. No last rites, just a shove and a prayer. Still want to time travel? Imagine your sunscreen melting, your sandals disintegrating, and your modern stomach rejecting even the air. Imagine stepping over a child baking in the sun, only to get swindled by a peddler and overcharged by a priest. Imagine surviving and realizing you've earned nothing but another day of it. The sun hasn't set yet, but the market is already gasping. Everything wilts under the assault of the July afternoon. The fabrics draped over stalls are too hot to touch. The bread hardens mid-sale. Wax candles slump like tired saints. Even the dobs, usual kings of the gutters, lie motionless in the shade, tongues lolling, eyes glazed. No one speaks unless they must. Breathing feels like work, but life goes on, of course. In medieval Spain, life always goes on, especially when it hurts. Lucia is still there, standing like a ghost beside her useless rosemary. Her children now sleep in the dirt behind her, skin scorched, lips cracked. She hasn't eaten since yesterday's market scraps. She doesn't even pray anymore. Not because she's lost faith, but because she can't afford to. God doesn't deal in rosemary and dry air. God, like the bishop, seems to prefer the rich. And perhaps that's the cruelest part of the medieval marketplace. Suffering isn't hidden. It's the background music. It plays in every cough, every moan, every staggered footstep. You don't walk past it, you walk through it. You smell it, trip over it, wipe it from your sleeves, and eventually you stop seeing it altogether. Even Don Ramiro, the velvet-sleeved taxman, has retreated. He's clever enough to vanish during peak heat, claiming clerical duties. Esteban, that oily trickster, has unrolled a makeshift canopy of stolen fabric, selling shade rentals by the minute. 5 coppers get you 5 breaths beneath it. One woman fainted before her turn came up. Esteban just dragged her out of line and kept counting coins. Across the square, a priest in gleaming sandals quotes scripture beneath a parasol held by a boy who hasn't had water all day. "Charity is divine," the priest announces, placing a single copper in a child's palm. Then he pockets 5 silver coins from a nearby merchant seeking absolution for underweight loaves. And then there's the well. There's only one public well in the marketplace, near the fish stalls, and it's barely that. Just a hole lined with crumbling stone and a creaky bucket tied with fraying rope. It hasn't been cleaned in living memory. Still, people crowd around it like it's the gates of heaven. The water is warm, gritty, and smells faintly of dead frog, but it's wet, and that's enough. A fight breaks out when a woman cuts the line. Screams rise, someone throws a turnip, then a shoe, then fists. The alguacil never arrives. He's passed out in the shade of a wine seller's cart. Order returns only when a nearby merchant offers to sell water from his private jug for triple the price. Yes, water is a business, and business is booming. Julian tries to help. He carries 2 leaky jugs from Alonso's stall and offers sips to a group of children. One mother weeps in thanks. Alonso smacks him later. "We sell meat, not mercy." Julian nods but doesn't stop. He's learning to disobey in secret, which, in this market, is the closest thing to morality. And the barefoot beggars? They multiply as the day rots on. New faces emerge. Strangers who walked in from nearby villages, hoping to trade thread or eggs, or just their dignity for anything edible. Most are turned away. Some collapse. A few beggars even beg other beggars. It's a feedback loop of despair so twisted it would be funny if it weren't real. Let's talk about shoes, or the lack of them. Shoes in medieval Spain weren't mass-produced. They were made by hand, stitched from leather that cost more than most could spare. When they wore out, they weren't thrown away. They were mended, patched, then worn again until the soles became memories. Many simply gave up and walked barefoot, their feet becoming tools, tough, filthy, scarred. It was a mark of class. You could spot a man's rank by what protected his feet. Nobles wore pointed shoes dyed with imported bark. Merchants wore thick-soled boots. Butchers wore blood-caked clogs. And the poor? They walked on burning stone, praying each step wasn't their last. Want to time travel? Start with your feet. Even Catalina, sharp as ever, knows this. She trades almond shells to a cobbler in exchange for broken sandals, then quietly gives them to children who limp past her stall. She says nothing, doesn't smile, just hands them over and returns to roasting. She's too old for hope, but not too old for usefulness. And still, the market remains indifferent, even as the sun turns carts into ovens, even as the poorest shrink into shadows, their eyes wide and vacant, even as flies land freely on eyes that no longer blink. There is no reprieve, no miracle. Only the slow, grinding truth that suffering doesn't pause, not for heat, not for mercy, and certainly not for your discomfort. So no, you wouldn't last a day here, because you'd look a barefoot child in the eye and realise there's nothing you can give them that hasn't already been taken. Chapter 7. The Foul Water Crisis. If there is one thing that will betray you faster than a taxman in Ávila's medieval market, it's the water. You might think you can handle the heat, the pickpockets, the overpriced wilted lettuce, even the shouting match over mouldy cheese. But your body, that soft, naive, modern husk you inhabit, cannot survive without clean hydration. And in 14th century Spain? That's a problem. Because water here isn't a gift, it's a trap. Let's begin with the basic truth. Most people didn't trust water. Not the rich, not the poor, not even the monks who claimed to bless it. And with good reason. The wells? Contaminated. The streams? Full of waste. The public fountains? Mosquito broths in stone bowls. If you saw clear water, you ran the other way. It meant someone had tampered with it, or worse, poisoned it to look clean. So what did people drink? Wine, beer, vinegar water, broth. Anything but water. Even children were weaned onto watered-down wine, and that's not just a cultural quirk. It was a survival tactic. Alcohol, even in weak concentrations, could kill off the pathogens water so lovingly carried. Cholera, dysentery, typhoid, intestinal worms, all waited patiently in every innocent sip. Enter Fray Hernando, our pious parasite of a priest, preaching about God's mercy while privately sipping boiled spiced wine behind his curtained chambers. He tells the poor to fast and purify their souls while his own chamber pot overflows. He also warns that illness comes from sin, not sanitation, a belief that, conveniently, absolves the church from ever cleaning its cisterns. One of the most cursed sources of water lies just outside the market wall, El Pozo del Diablo, the Devil's Well. Legend says it was once blessed, then cursed after a heretic spat in it. In reality, it's just a shallow hole dug by desperate hands, fed by runoff from the nearby slaughterhouses. The colour? Greenish-brown. The smell? Like someone boiled a rat in a bowl of leeks. Still, people drink from it. They have no choice. Lucia, our widowed herb seller, fetched a single jug from the Devil's Well 3 days ago. She boiled it. added mint, said a prayer. Then her youngest began vomiting blood. He's not the first, and he won't be the last. At least it wasn't the latrine trench, she whispered, as if that somehow made the suffering nobler. Then there's the merchant's well, supposedly clean. It sits behind a gated alley, guarded by a sullen man named Martin who charges for access. 2 coppers per bucket. But guess what? Martin draws from the same aquifer as the devil's well. The difference? He skims the frog eggs off the top. People line up anyway because filtered filth feels safer than obvious filth. And perception is everything. Let's not forget the animal water. Donkeys, pigs, goats all require it. So troughs are filled each morning, then ignored. By noon, they're thick with foam, feathers and dung. Julian, Alonso's apprentice, once accidentally dipped a water jug in one. Alonso beat him with a fish spine and called it education. Julian didn't cry. He just bled quietly and drank less. Meanwhile, the nobility and clergy, of course, have their own wells, deep, private, lined with tile, and often guarded by dogs. Water from these is boiled, blessed, strained through linen, and sometimes mixed with crushed herbs or ash for extra purity. These people live in the same city, breathe the same air. But when it comes to water, they may as well live in heaven. Esteban, ever the opportunist, has caught on. He now sells purification charms, wooden medallions soaked in rosemary oil, which he claims can neutralize poisoned wells. Just drop it in and recite the psalm, he says. It smells pleasant. That's the only miracle it performs. Still, people buy them. Not because they believe, but because hope drinks easier than truth. A local healer, one with actual knowledge, mind you, once tried to warn the town. Her name was Isabella de Luna, and she studied under a Moorish physician before the Christians torched his library. She told people to boil their water, to build covered wells, to clean their buckets. They called her a witch. She now lives outside the wall, tending to patients who can't afford superstition. The irony? The church eventually adopted her advice, repackaged as divine revelation. God told us to boil the water, Fray Hernando said one Sunday, conveniently forgetting Isabella's name. The water still tasted like moss and misery. But it boiled. Progress. And yet, the crisis persists. Because this isn't just about thirst, it's about control. Whoever owns the water owns the people. Don Ramiro once raised the well fee during a dry summer just to punish a merchant who dared insult him. 2 people died of dehydration that week. One was a child. The other, an old man too proud to beg. So, no, you wouldn't last a day here. You'd chug from the first bucket you saw, then curl into a puddle of regret while your bowels staged a rebellion. You'd scream for help, you'd cry for Gatorade, and the market would just step around you. Because in Ávila, water isn't life. It's a gamble. As the evening sun droops over Ávila's jagged rooftops, the market begins to quiet, but the thirst doesn't. If anything, the desperation deepens. The wine's been watered down, the broth has gone sour, and most of the day's food has already dried into crusty regret. The body aches for something, anything, cold, wet and safe. It won't find it. Instead, it finds rumours. Whispers crawl through the stalls like fleas. There's a spring beyond the vineyard wall, someone says. A Moorish aqueduct still flows under the granary, says another. Boil river water with olive leaves, another swears. None of it matters. Even if it were true, it wouldn't be accessible. The land is walled, guarded, owned, and ownership in Ávila is a weapon. Let's talk about well politics. There are 3 major wells in the district. The public hole near the fish stall, a biological weapon in disguise, the merchant-controlled pay well, a scam, and the cathedral cistern, sealed behind iron grates and blessed hourly by trembling acolytes. Only priests, nobles, and their pets get access to it. Literally, one afternoon, Julian saw a bishop's dog drink from a silver bowl filled from that holy cistern while a one-legged beggar passed out nearby. The dog wagged its tail. The beggar didn't wake up, so people improvise. Some dig shallow pits behind their homes. Others collect rainwater in clay bowls when it rains, which it hasn't in weeks. The poor soak old clothes in stale broth just to suck moisture from them. A few chew grapevines, not for food, but for the hint of liquid. Meanwhile, the barrels at taverns stay full, not because there's more wine, but because the wine is so watered down it practically counts as soup. Lucia has given up entirely. She hasn't fetched water in 2 days. Her children sleep in cycles of delirium. Her herbs have dried on the stalk. She now uses the last of her spit to moisten crushed mint, hoping the scent will fool her youngest into thinking relief is near. It doesn't work. The boy won't wake. Her eyes are hollow but dry. Even the market itself shows signs of dehydration. Fruits shrivel faster. Bread turns to stone. The fishmonger packed his stall with reeds soaked in vinegar, hoping to mask the decay. He still calls them fresh. Caught this morning, he insists, though the fish's eyes are cloudy and its belly bloated. No one argues. They just pinch their noses and pay. And yet, even now, water is profit. Esteban has changed tactics again. He now sells blessed stones, small pebbles he claims were dipped in holy wells in Santiago. Place one in your cup and the water purifies, he says. They're just river rocks. Julianne caught him rinsing them in the latrine trench. But they sell. Because desperation, as always, is the best customer. Further down, an old man sells snow from the mountains, kept in a box lined with straw, and lies. It's just ice scraped from a cellar wall. It melts before it reaches your lips. But for a few seconds, it feels like hope. He charges more for the feeling than the water. Let's talk about disease again, because how could we not? The worst outbreaks didn't start with rats or blood. They started with water. A cracked jug from the devil's well. A shared ladle at the wine stall. A contaminated batch of almond milk spoiled before sunrise. One sip, and a man begins coughing. A day later he bleeds from the gums. 2 more, and he's buried with his mouth sewn shut. People say it was bad luck. The wise know it was the water. And the church's answer? Prayer and penance. A local friar once claimed that drawing water with your left hand summoned demons. Another insisted that water touched by women during menstruation would rot the soul. People believed him. For weeks women were forbidden from approaching wells, even as children fainted in their laps. The actual solution? Boiling, covering, filtering. But such ideas were foreign. Literally, they came from Moorish physicians, Jewish herbalists, or worse, midwives. And no one wanted to be seen taking advice from people the church barely tolerated. Ironically, the only relatively safe water source in the area is owned by Zayed, the Moorish spice merchant. His family's home, inherited from grander days, contains an old ceramic-lined cistern built with engineering that predates most of the market itself. He uses the water sparingly for perfume making, incense cooling, and rare, whispered gifts to desperate neighbours. He tells no one. To do so would invite envy, accusation, or worse. Catalina, the almond seller, knows about it. She once traded him a bolt of linen for a single jug. "The last time I drank water without fear," she said afterward. She never told anyone. Loyalty runs deeper than thirst. As the sun finally collapses behind the tiled roofs, the market exhales. Not in relief, but in resignation. Another day survived. Another round of thirst endured. Another quiet funeral prepared. The bodies may be gone by morning, but the stains remain, on the cobbles, in the lungs, in the fragile, feverish memories of those who woke up dry-mouthed and afraid. So no, you wouldn't last a day here. You'd walk in, ask for a glass of water, and find yourself offered a prayer, a scam, or a shallow grave. Chapter 8. Public Humiliation and Punishment. As the first light of morning paints Ávila's crooked walls in hues of rust and ash, the market doesn't open with prayer or song, but with punishment. It's Thursday, and Thursday is Justice Day, if you could call it that. The stalls open slower. The vendors shout quieter. Even the dogs seem to bark less. Everyone knows what's coming. The stocks are being set. At the centre of the market, not far from Esteban's oil-stained tent and the butcher's slab of flies, stands the pillory, a wooden contraption designed not to restrain, but to humiliate. Thick, cracked beams, rusted iron hinges, and that smell sour wood soaked in decades of sweat, spit, and old blood. It's not hidden behind walls or fenced off. It's placed in the middle of everything. Because here, justice isn't served privately. It's paraded like rotten meat. Today's condemned is Miguel, a weaver's apprentice caught tampering with guild weights. He's 17, pale from hunger, wrists thin as rope. His master threw him under the mule cart the moment the accusation landed, and the alguacil, barely sober, dragged him straight to the pillory. No trial, no priest. Just 2 slaps, a signed confession, and now this. Julian watches from behind Alonso's stall. He knows Miguel. They shared figs once, traded insults, dreamed of leaving Ávila. Now Miguel stands bent in the stocks, neck and wrists trapped, flies crawling into his nose, as vendors prepare buckets of filth, rotten eggs, spoiled milk, pig entrails. One woman sells justice tomatoes for the occasion, buy one, throw one free, and the crowd gathers, not to participate, to participate. Because in medieval Spain, shame is entertainment. Children laugh, old men jeer. Housewives mutter curses and throw cabbage stems. One priest offers blessings in exchange for donations, then throws a pear himself, mouldy and bruised. A nobleman rides by on horseback and spits. God sorts the clean from the unclean, he says, lifting his silk hem to avoid the mud. Irony rides side saddle with him. Let's be clear, these punishments aren't about justice. They're about control. The pillory isn't for the dangerous, it's for the disobedient. Steal a loaf of bread? Stocks. Mock a tax collector? Stocks. Sell fish on a Sunday? Stocks. Refuse to tithe your best goat to the church? You're not just guilty, you're a public sermon now. Esteban, ever the showman, uses these moments well. He paces near the crowd, selling virtue vinegar to splash on the accused. Kills sin on contact, he shouts. Also good for boils. No one questions the ethics. They're too busy watching Miguel gag on cabbage pulp. Lucia, barefoot and tired, doesn't throw anything. She just watches. Her child once stood in that same spot, accused of theft, wrongly of course. He didn't last the full hour. His fever returned the next day and he never stood again. She never speaks about it, but she always watches, because remembering pain is the only way to keep it honest. Let's talk about the devices themselves. Stocks are just the beginning. There are also whipping posts, iron collars bolted to walls, and the infamous cage, a suspended iron trap used for thieves, heretics, and especially mouthy women. You're locked in and left to dangle. The birds do the rest. Sometimes, they say, people are forgotten in those cages, forgotten but never unnoticed. And the crowd? They pretend it's justice. That this ritual cleanses the city of sin. But it's not justice, it's theatre. Cheap, grotesque theatre that feeds the illusion of order. People walk away feeling safer, superior, righteous. They say, he deserved it. Then they overcharge for onions. Even the church, arbiters of mercy, fuel the spectacle. Fray Hernando blesses the stocks before each punishment. Let the pain purify, he declares. He once sentenced a woman to be shaved bald in public for speaking during Mass. Her crime? Asking where the tithe money went. She now sells scraps in the alley, covered in veils, her eyes hollow. Catalina, sharp as ever, mutters as she counts almonds. They punish the hungry, but bless the gluttons. No one disagrees. No one dares. Once, she paid 2 children to hide a priest's sandals during a flogging. He limped home barefoot. No one connected the dots. And what of Miguel, our weaver's boy? He lasts the hour. Barely. Covered in waste, humiliated, dehydrated. The alguacil unlocks the stock and lets him collapse. No one helps. His master won't take him back. He's tainted now. He crawls to the edge of the square, past the almond stall, past the devil's well, past a child vomiting in the heat. So, no, you wouldn't last a day here. Evening descends, and the smell of spilled milk and rotten vegetables lingers in the square, coating the air like grease on old cloth. Miguel is gone now, dragged away by someone who didn't give their name. The stocks stand empty, but still sticky, their iron fittings steaming faintly in the cooling dusk. The market continues on, as it always does, as though nothing happened. But the echoes of the punishment remain. They always do. You see, in medieval Spain, punishment wasn't designed to correct. It was designed to remind. A daily warning etched in splinters and screams. The authorities didn't need prisons on every corner when they had shame and spectacle. Why hide discipline behind stone walls when you could display it next to the tomato cart? Tomorrow, the stocks will be wiped down, barely. A new name will be written in chalk on the post. A new set of hands will be locked in place. Maybe it will be a drunk. Maybe a boy who insulted a priest. Maybe a woman whose husband died in debt and who failed to inherit his stall because women didn't inherit, they were inherited. Let's not pretend it was just the pillory. Take, for instance, the whipping post. A low iron ring sunk into the stones near the bread cellar. On Fridays, the alguacil drags out the lash-braided horsehide tipped with bone. The accused is tied by the wrists and whipped publicly, not in private dungeons or courts, in front of children eating dried figs and merchants haggling over cheese. Last month, a baker's apprentice, no older than 14, was accused of speaking unclean thoughts. No proof, no witnesses. Just the word of his master's wife, who didn't like the way he looked at her goat. They lashed him until his back resembled a butcher's table. His only defence was screaming, "I didn't," over and over until the blood drowned his voice. The crowd said nothing. Someone even bought extra bread from the stall out of sympathy. Not for the boy, for the woman troubled by him. Even Julianne has seen these things. Too many times. The first time, he vomited. Alonso beat him for wasting meat. Now he watches with a clenched jaw, fists behind his back, eyes fixed on nothing. "They say it's for order," he once whispered to Catalina. She just snorted. Then why do they enjoy it so much? And let's not ignore the gendered cruelty. Women faced public punishments uniquely tailored for humiliation. The scold's bridle, a metal muzzle fitted around the head with a sharp piece to press down on the tongue, was reserved for women who talked too much. It didn't matter what they said. If it annoyed a man, it qualified. A widow once asked for lower rent. They caged her mouth for a full market day. Her daughter never spoke above a whisper again. Or consider the punishment stool, placed in the square and reserved for women accused of adultery, heresy, or simply being unruly. They were stripped to the waist, seated for hours while passers-by mocked their appearance, groped them, or spat. Some broke, some endured. All were remembered, not as victims, but as warnings. The clergy, of course, condoned it all. "Pain humbles the soul," Fray Hernando once declared after blessing a lash soaked in vinegar. To endure is to be saved. Easy for him to say, draped in linen, sipping almond milk behind veils. He once sentenced a man to public flogging for insulting the church. The insult? Asking where last year's harvest tithe went, and the punishment didn't always end at the post. Social exile was the invisible whip. Once punished, you were tainted. No stall would rent to you, no employer would hire you, no baker would sell to you without a surcharge. You became a living warning not through scars but through silence. The market would swallow you whole, and you'd die standing up, surrounded by people who refused to make eye contact. Critics? Oh, they existed. A Moorish scholar once wrote that Christian punishments were rituals of cruelty, masquerading as justice. His name was erased from city records. A nun questioned the bishop's frequent floggings. She was sent to a silent convent in the mountains. Her letters, the ones that survived, describe hunger, cold, and the sound of whipping echoing through stone halls. Even Catalina, sharp-tongued and unafraid, walks a careful line. She can mutter, grumble, drop sly comments. But if she ever dares to publicly criticize the wrong man, she knows exactly where she'll end up. That's why she hides her sharpest words inside jokes. That's why she smiles only with her teeth. So why did the people endure it? Why didn't they rise up? Because punishment was predictable. And in a world of chaos, disease, and hunger, predictability was power. As long as the rules remained visible brutal, yes, but consistent people felt they understood their place. Better the cruelty you know than the mercy you can't afford. And you? You wouldn't last a day. You'd speak up, ask questions, try to intervene, and in doing so, you'd make yourself visible. And in medieval Spain, visibility is vulnerability. It's not the sin that gets punished. It's the voice that speaks it aloud. Chapter 9. Women in the Shadows. If you think the medieval market of Ávila was ruled solely by shouting men and blood-stained butchers, look closer. Peer past the stalls, beneath the tattered awnings, behind the counters lined with stale figs and cracked jugs of vinegar, and you'll find them. Women, everywhere, working, bargaining, surviving. Not loudly, not safely, but constantly. Because while men strutted and barked, it was women who moved the marrow of the market. They did it quietly, often invisibly, and almost always under threat. Take Maria, for example. A seamstress, without a guild, without a husband, without land. She squats in a shaded corner of the market square each day, surrounded by threadbare fabrics and clumsy needles, mending what others discard. Her work is steady, her fingers quick, her pay? Pennies, if that. She charges less than the men, because she must. Guilds didn't welcome women. Her hands are cracked, her spine curved from hours of hunching, her eyes red from dust. And still, she stitches. Why doesn't she leave? Where would she go? Because, here's the medieval truth, women were commerce. But rarely owners. They baked the bread but didn't price it. Brewed the ale but couldn't sell it without a man's name on the ledger. Raised the goats but couldn't lease the land they grazed. Their labour was essential, but their autonomy, a luxury. Even widows, often seen as semi-independent, walked a razor's edge. Lucia, the herb seller, is one. Her late husband's debts haunt her like unpaid ghosts. His stall was reclaimed by his cousin. His tools were seized by the church in lieu of tithes. All she was allowed to keep were the bruised mint leaves and a crumbling mortar she hides in her shawl. She sells what little she grows, hoping not to attract the attention of guild enforcers, men who insist all herbal remedies must be approved. She can't afford their approval, so she lies. She tells people her mint is for rats. They nod, and still they buy. Meanwhile, Catalina, our sharp-witted almond seller, has carved a place through wit and age. She's old enough to be dismissed as harmless, which in this world is the closest thing to freedom a woman gets. But she remembers when she wasn't, when she had to barter in whispers, defend her stall from drunks, duck the hands of passing merchants. Her knowledge, her networks, her quiet threats, those are her armour now. Let's talk about girls. The ones who run barefoot between stalls, carrying jugs of wine and armfuls of cloth, fetching spices, kneading dough, singing for coins they rarely get to keep. Most work beside their mothers or aunts. Some are rented out by their fathers. Others on their own. If they're lucky, they sell rosemary and gossip. If not, they end up in the alley behind the tavern with coin shoved into their skirts and bruises no one mentions. Don't ask what happens when they complain. The alguacil shrugs. The priest quotes scripture. Suffer in silence, they say, like a good woman should. And it's not just physical danger. There's institutional erasure, no guilds, no titles, no contracts. Even the laws. When they bothered to mention women, mostly did so in terms of property. You weren't a vendor. You were the wife of a vendor. You weren't a merchant. You were attached to the shop. Some women found work as wet nurses, nursing noble babies while their own children starved. Others as laundresses, scrubbing the filth of the wealthy from linen they'd never afford. A few, like Esteban's sister Isabel, ran unofficial guest houses for travelling merchants. They offered soup, bedding, and comfort. Some called it business, others called it sin. Either way, it was survival. And yet, despite it all, they endured. Women built their own unofficial networks. Bread shared here. Warnings whispered there. If a tax collector grew too greedy, they told each other who to avoid. If a stall caught fire, women passed buckets faster than any city guard. If a girl went missing, the women were the first to knock on doors. Quiet resistance, stitched into aprons and baskets. One story floats through the market like a stubborn ember. Ana del Pino, a weaver's daughter who sold cloth under her father's name. When he died, the guild refused to renew the license. She continued anyway, sold from her steps, refused to leave. The alguacil arrested her. She was sentenced to the pillory. The day she was placed in the stocks, every woman in the market refused to work. They stood silently, arms crossed, blocking the square. Bread didn't bake, wine didn't pour, cloth didn't sell. Anna was released that afternoon. No one talked about it after. They didn't need to. The message was stitched into memory. But don't mistake that for revolution. It was a tremor, not a quake. The system remained. The stalls reopened. The priest still barked about obedience. Yet something shifted, even slightly. And in a world that tried daily to erase women, a shift was survival. So no, you wouldn't last a day here. Not because of the labour or the heat or the filth, but because you'd be forced to witness how much was done by those given nothing and how little was changed by those given everything. The sun is dipped below the rooftops and the market begins its slow unravelling. Stalls are pulled shut, chickens are herded back into crates. The wine sellers count coins under flickering lanterns, and the lingering scent of sweat, roasted onions, and something vaguely floral clings to the dusk. But even as the market closes, the women do not stop. Their work, like the debt it tries to outrun, never ends. You see, in Ávila, women's labour wasn't scheduled, it was expected. After a day spent boiling broth for customers, the same hands must tend to fevers, mend tunics, scrape soot from pots, calm children, bury stillbirths, and if time allows, sleep sitting up. There are no closing hours for the invisible. Take Maria the seamstress. Her last client of the day, a merchant's wife, arrives late, demanding a torn bodice be repaired by sunrise. No pay up front, of course. You'll be paid in referrals, she says, as though gossip fills stomachs. Maria nods politely. Then she goes home, unrolls her bundle of needles, and begins to work by candlelight, eyes burning from the effort, ears still ringing from the day's insults. And that's another truth of the medieval market. Respect was rationed. It didn't go to the hardest workers. It went to those with titles, with husbands, with connections. A woman alone could labour all day and be addressed only as girl, whore, or witch, depending on her outfit and who was watching. Lucia spends her evening boiling rosemary into a bitter paste, praying it will settle her child's gut. He hasn't eaten in 2 days. The water was foul, the bread stolen. Her face is gaunt. Her arms shake as she stirs. But she hums a lullaby anyway, because if she stops, he'll hear the truth in the silence. And children deserve some lies. Meanwhile, in a narrow alley near the tavern, Isabel, Esteban's sister, lights the last of her candles. Her guest house will take in 3 men tonight, travelling traders with hands too eager and morals too loose. She locks her door, not to keep danger out, but to control how it enters. She charges extra for silence. No one asks what happens inside. The market doesn't judge women like Isabel. It uses them, then forgets them. And what of Catalina? She sharpens her almond blade beneath a lantern, muttering to herself about the bishop's feet. Soft as pudding, she says. No man who preaches hunger should have ankles like that. Her commentary is half insult, half prayer. She knows the women of Ávila listen more to her than to any sermon. They pretend not to. But they do. Her stall is more than commerce. It's confession. Even girls too young to bleed are not spared. 10-year-olds sweep stalls. 8-year-olds run messages. Some carry siblings on their backs while selling dried figs they're not allowed to eat. Their innocence is brief, often gone before their milk teeth. One girl, Alba, lost her mother last spring. Now she fetches water for 2 old men who let her sleep behind their stall. No one has asked what she's given in return. Clothing, too, tells stories. Most women wear patched linen gowns, faded from sun and time, tied with belts made of old rope or torn ribbon. Wealthy women glide through in layered wool and imported dyes, but even they know better than to linger. Beauty here is a liability. It draws attention. Attention draws questions. And questions, for a woman, are never harmless. Let's talk about wages. Men earned coins, women earned allowance, grudging gifts, shared profits, scraps of copper. A husband might give his wife 10% of the bread she baked. A merchant might tip his female assistant with leftover stew. A boy could earn more carrying wood for half an hour than his mother did selling soap for an entire day. The economy was not only rigged, it was rehearsed. Everyone knew their lines. Still, women found ways to subvert the system. They hid coins in hems. smuggled herbs past guild censors, bartered favours, tracked debts mentally, brewed cures under the guise of soup. They weren't taught letters, but they knew which priest liked saffron wine, which butcher looked the other way, which bishop's niece got pregnant last Lent. Knowledge was their currency, whispered and passed hand to hand like contraband scripture. And let's not pretend they were saints. Some women betrayed, underpriced rivals, exposed secrets, turned in neighbours for stolen bread just to earn favour with the alguacil. Desperation didn't discriminate, it sharpened everyone. But in the end, it was women who bore the silence. When a boy died of tainted water, it was his mother who washed the body. When a husband vanished in debt, it was his wife who begged the taxman for a mercy she'd never receive. When a girl disappeared into the back of a tavern, it was the women who noticed, and never said it aloud. So no, you wouldn't last a day here, not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. Because in Ávila, women weren't just survivors. They were the scaffolding beneath the city's decay, holding everything up, unheard, unthanked, and still standing. Chapter 10, Disease in the Dough. By now, you've smelled the market's rot, tasted its thirst, and felt its heat. But perhaps you're still holding on to a dream, a simple one really, to buy a hunk of bread, tear it open, and find comfort in its warmth. Surely bread, of all things, must be safe. A mercy in a world of knives and coughs. Let me end that fantasy for you. Because in medieval Ávila, bread was just another gamble, a crusty, deceptive coin toss between nourishment and nausea. If you were lucky, it filled your belly. If not, it filled your grave. Let's begin with the grain. It arrived in sacks from nearby farms, often months old, sometimes sprouting mould, always unwashed. Rats nested in it. Weevils laid eggs in it. Merchants sifted the worst of it out with bare hands and prayers. What couldn't be cleaned was ground down anyway. What the stomach can't see won't hurt it, they said. They were wrong. The flour itself was a cocktail of disappointment. Real wheat was rare, too expensive, too precious. Most loaves were stretched with barley, rye, bean husks, even powdered chalk. Some bakers added sawdust. Yes, sawdust. Not for flavour, but to bulk it up. Because when your buyer is starving, they won't argue with texture. They'll chew, swallow, and thank you through cracked lips. Then came the water. And if you've been paying attention, you already know that water was the real villain of this tale. Carried in clay pots, left uncovered, drawn from wells that doubled as mosquito playgrounds. It was often tainted before it touched the flour. The mixture fermented with sweat and flies. The ovens? Simple stone chambers heated by burning animal dung. Ash clung to every surface. Sometimes small rodents roasted along with the loaves. One baker in Ávila was fined after a noblewoman bit into a crust and found a rat tooth. He paid the fine in stale biscuits. The law didn't specify currency. Let's not forget ergot, a parasitic fungus that infected rye, turning it black and toxic. Bread made from ergot-tainted grain caused symptoms that looked like madness, hallucinations, seizures, vomiting, convulsions. Entire families would eat the same loaf and fall to the ground, shaking and screaming, limbs twisting like vines. They called it St. Anthony's fire. The church called it a punishment for sin. The market? It just called it Tuesday. Even the baking process wasn't clean. The dough was kneaded on wooden tables never scrubbed, shaped with hands that had just picked lice, and baked in batches, some rising, some collapsing, some simply turning to stone. Bakers often burned the first few loaves to test the oven, then sold them anyway. Waste nothing. Regret everything. Now, bread prices were fixed in theory. But when wheat was scarce, bakers found ways around that. Smaller loaves, hollow centres, or selling blessed bread at higher prices, supposedly baked with holy water, actually just less spoiled well water with rosemary. Poor families would pool coins for a single roll. A single, hard, bitter roll shared 6 ways. Julian, on his rare breaks, sometimes bought one for his mother. He didn't eat it himself. He chewed boiled turnips behind Alonso's stall instead. One time, he bit into a piece of market bread and cracked a molar on a stone. Be glad it wasn't bone, Alonso grunted. Julianne never smiled wide after that. Women bore the worst of it. They were expected to stretch every loaf, to soften it with broth, to feed children first, to apologise when it wasn't enough. Lucia once boiled stale bread with dried lavender to dull the taste of mould. Her daughter thanked her anyway, vomited it later, and never blamed her. And then there were the bakers. They weren't villains. Not always. They were poor too, struggling under grain taxes, oven tithes, guild fees and corruption. One baker, Hernan, tried to switch to cleaner flour, bought from a Moorish supplier. He was fined for unsanctioned trade. His stall was burned. The guild declared it economic heresy. Now he sells brittle crackers made from bean pulp. People still buy them. But some bakers were crooks. One mixed powdered bone into his flour for density. Another stored dough in leather sacks lined with sheep hair. Still another bribed inspectors with sweet rolls, while selling flatbread stuffed with lard that turned green before sundown. He called them market pies. People loved them. Most didn't survive them. Bread was ritual in Ávila. You prayed before baking it, you crossed yourself before eating it, you apologized after digesting it. It sat on every table, beside every corpse, at the centre of every meal. And yet it killed just as easily as it comforted. So, no, you wouldn't last a day here. You'd buy the bread, you'd smile. You'd tear it open, inhale deeply, bite hard and wonder, moments later, if the twitch in your fingers meant you were full or already dying. The morning after a bad loaf wasn't just unpleasant, it was dangerous. Because in Ávila, when bread betrayed you, no one came to help. There was no apothecary to soothe your convulsions, no hospital to take your fevered body, no priest to admit, maybe, just maybe, the devil wasn't in your soul, but in the dough. You simply lay there, in the straw, on stone, in filth, twitching, sweating, sometimes biting your tongue until it split. Your neighbours muttered prayers and avoided your gaze. Your family, if they hadn't eaten the same bread, stepped back. Not out of cruelty, but out of fear. Fear of contagion, fear of demons, fear of the church. Because when sickness struck, blame didn't fall on the baker. It fell on you. You must have sinned. You must have doubted the saints. You must have stolen. One man lost 3 fingers to gangrene after a roll stuffed with spoiled fat. The priest insisted it was God's punishment for skipping Mass. No one questioned the theology. Questioning was dangerous. Still, people ate the bread. What else could they do? The market offered few alternatives. Meat was rare, fruit unreliable, vegetables overpriced. You could boil grass or mash old beans, but neither filled the belly like bread, even bad bread. So they ate, cautiously, gratefully, sometimes with shaking hands, because in Ávila hunger made fools out of everyone. Take Anna, a miller's daughter, now married to a shoemaker with more debt than souls. She spends her days baking flat rounds of journey bread hard as tile, meant to last weeks. To stretch her flour, she adds dried bean husks and lard scraped from butcher scraps. Her youngest once found a beetle baked into his slice. He named it, then ate it. They laughed, and then cried. Or consider Rafa, a street boy who sells bread ends from market stalls. They're mostly crusts, sometimes chewed, often stepped on. He doesn't wash them, just dusts them off and resells them for a coin. Children buy them, not because they're naive, but because hunger doesn't allow luxury. And yet the illusion of bread as holy persisted. The church blessed bread before Mass, handing out little discs of purity that tasted like paper and grace. They told people that real bread, true bread, was sacred, infused with divine will. Meanwhile, the poor gagged on mouldy rolls and asked if their stomach pain was penance. One nun even claimed ergot poisoning was a sign of spiritual awakening. If your limbs twist, she said, it is the Lord reshaping you. By now, even Zaid, the Moorish merchant, has noticed the trend. He's begun selling spice sachets to mask the stench of stale loaves. His cinnamon is priced for nobles, but his rosemary salt sells quickly among the poor. They sprinkle it on blackened bread, imagining it's from a royal feast. The mind needs comfort too. Catalina, ever sharp, mutters as she bites into a barley biscuit harder than the bishop's heart. She dips it in wine to soften it. Doesn't help. Still, she eats, because complaining about bread is like cursing the sun, pointless, and likely to get you punished if the wrong ears are nearby. And what of the bakers themselves? Some tried. Truly. They sweat their tables. They sourced better flour. They experimented with honey or dried fruit until the guild fined them for unauthorized recipe variation. Yes, even creativity was policed. Others broke under the pressure. One hung himself from the rafters after a noble accused him of poisoning a bun. The noble's son had simply choked while boasting. But once death enters a loaf, it never leaves your name. Inspections, rare. And when they happened, they were ceremonial. A guild man dipped a finger into dough, nodded, and walked away with a loaf for sampling. Real inspection came from the crowd. If your bread caused illness more than once, word spread. You didn't get punished. You just vanished from memory. The worst fate of all. Bread theft was also common. Hungry hands reached across carts. Children snatched loaves and ran. Punishment? Stocks. Whipping. Sometimes fingers removed. One boy lost 2 toes after a failed escape. He hadn't stolen bread. He'd been accused of looking like someone who might. That was enough. Julianne, cautious as ever, now buys only from a widow who uses her own well and grinds her grain by hand. Her loaves are small, misshapen, but warm. He says they smell like mornings before his father died. He saves a piece for Lucia when he can, doesn't tell Alonso. Kindness, after all, is best practiced in secret. So, no, you wouldn't last a day here, because you'd believe bread was simple, that it meant comfort, kindness, life. In Ávila, bread isn't food, it's fate, wrapped in crust and carried by hunger. And sometimes that fate bites back. Chapter 11, After Hours, Taverns, Lust and Violence. As the sun slips behind the city walls and the final cries of hawkers fade into the crackling dusk, the market of Ávila does not sleep. It shifts. Daylight trades commerce for chaos. The stalls close, but the real transactions begin. Not over scales and coins, but under tables, behind tavern doors, and in alleyways that stink of old wine and fresh regret. Because after hours, the market isn't a place of trade. It's a place of release from rules, from shame, from hunger, from dignity. The air thickens with smoke and lust. The wine flows, so do lies, and knives. Let us begin at El Gallo Keglita, a tavern so crooked its doorway leans to the left like it's ashamed of its clientele. The floor is always damp, the mugs always chipped, the bread harder than confessions, and the wine? God's help you. It tastes like vinegar left to ferment in a priest's boot. Still, the place is packed. Every night. Esteban is already there, arms wide, voice louder than the room deserves. He's telling a story, probably invented, about a bishop, a goose, and a barrel of pepper. No one cares if it's true, it's entertaining, and that's what sells after dark. Story, song, and scandal. Across from him, Martin the knife seller plays dice with 2 merchants and a friar. The friar wins every roll, not because he's lucky, but because he's cheating. The others know, they let him. Better the priest wins than accuses. No one wants to confess again this week. At the corner table, a woman named Alda leans forward on her elbows, smiling with the slow calculation of someone who's heard every pickup line in 3 languages. She's not a lady of the night. She's a widow of opportunity, offering company, conversation, and a bed if you've got coin and no questions. She picks her clients carefully. Once she rejected a noble. He came back with soldiers. She bit one. Spent a week in the stocks. Now she carries a knife and a reputation. And in the alley just behind the tavern, deals unfold in whispers. A smuggler sells Moorish spices. A boy offers a ring he found in the bishop's bathhouse. A man named Thomas trades secrets for silver. Who paid off the taxman? Who's planning to flee town? Who's bedding the baker's wife? Everything has a price, and trust is worth less than beer foam. Violence, of course, is the main currency. It comes fast and without warning. A shove, a slur, a spilled drink. Suddenly mugs fly, teeth crack, and someone screams. The tavern owner doesn't intervene. He just removes the chairs. Easier to clean blood off the floor than splinters from the bench. One night, a man insulted the alguacil's mother. The alguacil broke 2 of his fingers and threw him into a pig pen. No trial, no fuss. The pigs didn't complain. Now, let's talk about women again, because night changes little except the lighting. For many, the dark brings danger. Whispers turn into grabs. Invitations become traps. There are no patrols, no justice. If a woman is assaulted, she's questioned. What were you wearing? Why were you out? If she fights back, she's punished for violence. If she speaks out, she's accused of witchcraft. Silence, once again, becomes survival. Even Lucia, who rarely leaves her stall, was once followed by a man who claimed to be offering alms. He cornered her by the latrines. She escaped by throwing mint in his eyes. The next day, she returned to work like nothing happened, because there is no time for wounds, just work. Julian, too young for wine and too old for ignorance, has learned to walk home quickly after dark. He saw a man stabbed last week near the well. Didn't flinch, just moved faster. Alonso says, "That's the price of freedom." What he means is, that's what happens when no one is watching. The church, of course, condemns it all. By day they preach abstinence, temperance, chastity. By night their novices buy drinks in disguise, and sometimes more. Everyone knows. No one speaks. The tavern owner keeps a special bottle for them. For the soul, he winks. It's just stronger wine with clove and cinnamon to mask the sin. The irony is thick. The more pious the sermon, the filthier the night. As if penance is a currency that buys misbehaviour in advance. Critics, when they existed, called the nighttime market a theatre of decay. They weren't wrong. The market after hours is loud, lewd and lawless. But it's also honest. Here, people show who they really are, desperate, bored, bitter, aching. They laugh too loud, they drink too fast, they kiss too hard. Not out of joy, but because the morning always returns, and with it hunger and rules. So, no, you wouldn't last a day here. But at night, you'd probably get killed before your wine went warm. Midnight approaches, but Ávila's market refuses to sleep. It simply mutates, mutters louder, stumbles harder, sins deeper. The candles burn low. The wine barrels weep from overuse. Laughter turns sharp, edged with bitterness. If daytime is a mask, then night is the reveal, and what lies beneath is rarely pleasant. Outside El Gallo Cagrita, the cobbles are slick with something sticky wine perhaps, or blood. No one checks, no one cares. A drunk snores beside a pile of oyster shells. A rat scurries past, trailing the scent of soured cheese and secrets. Inside, the tavern is a furnace of noise. The lute player has broken 2 strings but still plays, more rhythm than melody. The crowd doesn't mind. They're too busy arguing about saints and taxes, both of which feel equally imaginary at this hour. Esteban, now flushed and louder than ever, slaps the table as he accuses a merchant of underweight salt bags. "You'd short-change St. Peter if he bought pepper," he howls. The merchant throws a mug. It misses, barely. Everyone cheers. Another round is ordered. But beneath the laughter something festers. Resentment, built up from long hours, empty stomachs, broken marriages, unpaid debts. At night, that resentment needs an outlet. And the market provides. In a shadowy booth, Tomas sells information. He doesn't speak loudly, he doesn't drink, he just listens. To drunks, to widows, to lovers with loose tongues. Then he sells what he hears to anyone with coin or blackmail. Just last week, he uncovered that a baker's assistant was hiding a Moorish lover. Now she's vanished, and the baker sells twice as much bread. No one asks why. Down the alley, Isabel closes the shutters of her guest house. Not because business is done, but because she chooses who enters. A man pounds the door, demanding entry. She opens the window and pours slop on his head. He curses in 3 dialects. She laughs. Her knife gleams on the sill. He leaves. But not everyone is so lucky. Near the fish stalls, 2 boys fight over a coin, one barely 10, the other no older than 15. Their punches are weak, wild, more desperation than anger. A few adults gather, not to stop it, but to bet on it. Blood spills. The smaller boy falls. The older one limps off, pocketing the copper and wiping tears on his sleeve. Later, they'll share a stolen apple in silence. That's just how it works. Further down, a fire breather performs for a handful of sleepy-eyed children. He's drunk, sloppy. The flame curls too close to his beard. A woman laughs. The children scream. He takes a bow anyway, then collapses beside his goat. The goat looks unimpressed. And what of justice? Where are the guards? There aren't any. The alguacil, Ávila's supposed keeper of order, is passed out behind the wine vendor's barrel. His snoring is rhythmic, reliable. Occasionally someone steals a coin from his pouch. Once, someone urinated on his boot. When he wakes, he'll arrest someone at random to save face. Preferably someone poor or foreign or both. The church, as usual, remains silent. Its priests lock their doors early, clutching their ledgers tighter than their rosaries. Fray Hernando, ever the pious actor, once claimed, "The devil roams at night." He wasn't wrong. He just forgot to mention the devil wears linen and smells like sour figs. Even Catalina, who usually sleeps by her stall, stays awake longer on nights like this. She sits with a blade in her lap and a stone in her pocket, just in case. Her eyes scan the market, but her mind drifts. She remembers when she was young and brave and stupid enough to believe that nighttime was romantic. That was before she saw a girl bled out behind the meat stall, before she watched a monk whisper forgiveness while tying someone's wrists. Because in this market, night reveals the predators. And not all of them bite. Some whisper, some barter. Some offer kindness first. But they all take. Women, of course, suffer most. Those who work after dark are assumed to be for sale. Those who drink are assumed to be loose. Those who laugh too loud are remembered and punished for it later. If they disappear, the market shrugs. If they scream, the walls ignore it. And if they survive, they're called names that echo longer than bruises. But it's not just women. The sick, the drunk, the foreign, the friendless. They all become targets after sunset. A boy from Toledo once came looking for work. He slept by the well. In the morning, he was gone. The well stank for weeks. No one investigated. So no, you wouldn't last a day here. But at night, you wouldn't even last until your second drink. Chapter 12, one slip, one sentence. You've made it this far. Somehow. You've watched the sun rise over blood-slicked cobbles, dodged pickpockets and tax collectors, tasted tainted bread, and survived a marketplace that smells like a dying mule's confession. But survival in Ávila's medieval market isn't about grit or strength or cleverness. It's about control. Specifically, knowing when to speak, when to stay silent, and when to disappear completely. Because here, one misplaced word, one accidental glance, one slip of the tongue or worse of the face, can cost you everything. Take Nicolas, a travelling mason from Salamanca. Came looking for work. Good hands, better tongue, too clever. One afternoon, as Don Ramiro passed, puffed up in velvet and vanity, Nicholas muttered, "That robe has seen more meals than his parish." Someone laughed. Someone else told Ramiro. Nicolas was arrested before sunset. His trial, non-existent. His punishment, swift. First the stocks, then the lash, then exile. But he didn't make it past the city gate. His body was found floating in the irrigation ditch, eyes open, throat cut. The market whispered it was bandits. The smarter ones said nothing at all. That's the thing about Ávila. Justice is less about guilt and more about timing. Insult a noble when he's sober, you're fined. Do it when he's drunk, you're dead. Ask why bread is smaller today. The baker shrugs. Ask twice. The guild notices. Look too long at the wrong woman, you're chased. Speak to her, you're beaten. Speak for her, you're tried for inciting disobedience. Even a gesture could doom you. A raised eyebrow, a smirk, a poorly timed cough during a bishop's sermon. One man was flogged for sneezing too loudly during Mass. They said it was the devil leaving his body. He said it was dust. He never sneezed again. And yet, somehow, people keep slipping. Because survival is exhausting. And even the sharpest tongues eventually move too fast. Even the most silent mouths are betrayed by expression. In a world where the line between safety and sentencing is invisible, paranoia becomes posture. Lucia once forgot herself. A nobleman complained, Her rosemary made his soup taste peasant-like. She replied, "It's soup. You're lucky it tastes like anything." She was reported by his servant. Spent 3 days kneeling outside the cathedral. No food, no water, just birds, sun and shame. When she returned, she no longer made jokes, just mint tea and silence. Julian, too, learned the cost of words. He once whispered to another boy that Alonso skimmed fat off his meat sales. The boy laughed. Told someone else. By week's end, Alonso had whipped Julian with a gut-stained apron and made him kneel in the slaughterhouse overnight. He didn't cry, but he never spoke casually again. Even Catalina, old and clever, misjudged once. She teased a tax collector's daughter about her coin-shaped cheeks. A harmless jab. The girl cried. Her father returned that night and broke Catalina's table. "Let's see you sell almonds from the dirt," he spat. She did, for a month. Refused help, just squatted in the mud, selling from a sack. The entire market watched and remembered. And then there are the false slips. Deliberate lies whispered to ruin others. A jealous vendor claims her rival cursed a priest. A scorned lover says his ex is a Moor in disguise. A beggar accuses a child of theft, hoping to distract from his own sticky fingers. These accusations don't require proof, just volume. The louder voice wins. Truth is too fragile for this place. And yet, people endure. Why? Because the alternative is worse. Silence means starvation. To survive, you must speak, just carefully. You must smile, just faintly. You must insult, but only downward. You must weep, but only where no one can see. Zaid, the Moorish spice merchant, mastered this art. He says much with few words. Compliments wrapped in riddles. Criticism hidden in metaphor. When asked why his saffron costs more, he replies, "Gold listens longer than silver." When insulted, he bows, then raises prices the next day. The church encourages all this, of course, not directly, but through sermons about humility, obedience, and the dangers of pride. The tongue is the devil's ladder, Fray Hernando once preached. Convenient for a man who speaks 10 times more than he listens. He accused a cobbler of blasphemy last Lent. The man had simply asked, "Why does the tithe rise when the wheat fails?" That was enough. The market remembers these things. They stick, like old blood on stone. So no, you wouldn't last a day here. Not because you'd be hungry, or filthy, or tired, but because you'd open your mouth at the wrong moment. And in Ávila, the wrong moment is always waiting. Chapter 12. One slip, one sentence, as the market of Ávila draws to a close. At least for this day you might think, having endured its filth and fury, that you've earned a moment of peace. A chance to breathe, reflect, perhaps even boast. I made it through. But beware, in this place the moment you relax is when they get you, because justice here has no expiration. It is not swift. It is not fair. It is not blind. It is slow, selective, and never forgets. A wrong word whispered weeks ago might bloom into punishment today. A glance at a friar's coin purse last Sabbath might earn you a visit from city guards tomorrow. Even silence is suspect. Too quiet, and they ask what you're hiding. Too loud, and they decide you're hiding too poorly. Take Martina, a laundress who once poured a bucket of water from her balcony onto a gossiping neighbour. A petty act, a joke even. But the neighbour remembered. 2 months later, she claimed Martina kept unclean herbs for love spells. The church didn't ask questions, they took her in. Her stall now sells onions, but no one knows who runs it, or where Martina went. This isn't justice, it's maintenance, keeping the market in its place. Those at the top protected by silence, those below crushed by volume. When someone powerful slips, the system bends to protect. When someone powerless slips, it sharpens to punish. Confession booths, those dark wooden cages near the cathedral, do more harm than help. You enter hoping for relief. You leave with a rumour trailing behind you like smoke. He confessed he doubted the relic. She said she envied her neighbour's husband. He whispered he no longer believes in penance. None of these are crimes. And yet, they become punishable the moment someone repeats them. And repeat they do. Because in Ávila, snitching is survival. If you're caught near trouble, name someone else. Quickly, loudly, with detail. Lie if you must. Better them than you. Even children learn this, especially children. One little girl, Inez, once dropped a loaf she couldn't pay for. When confronted, she claimed her brother told her to take it. Her brother cried. He didn't speak for a week, but he got the beating. Inez got dinner. Even Fray Hernando, the city's favourite hypocrite, practices preemptive absolution. He confesses his own sins before others can accuse him. Small ones, of course. Pride, impatience, the occasional impure thought. He frames them as burdens. The crowd nods. Meanwhile, the real burdens, his theft of land, his cruelty to debtors, remain untouched, unspoken, protected by collar and curtain. The worst slips, though, are unintentional truths. Someone says the market is corrupt. Someone complains that nobles never pay their dues. Someone wonders why sick children get no aid while horses are blessed with holy water. These truths are like sparks near dry parchment. Everyone knows they're right, but everyone steps back fast, and whoever spoke is left to burn alone. There was once a man who asked, publicly, why the bishop's shoes cost more than his house. The crowd laughed. 2 days later, the man was missing. The crowd stopped laughing. Even animals aren't exempt. A donkey kicked a priest once. They killed the donkey and fined its owner for raising a beast of heresy. No one knows what that means. But the owner lost his farm. The priest got a new mule. And yes, there are innocent souls, those who truly meant no harm. They spoke kindly. They gave generously. They stayed quiet. And yet, they still slipped. Because in Ávila, purity is a myth. Everyone is one mistake away from the stocks, one accusation away from a confession, one blink away from a sentence. Zaid, who has outlived several competitors, keeps a strict code. Never comment on politics. Never discuss the church. Never raise your voice. Always agree, politely, vaguely. When pressed for opinions, he smiles and says, "The wind knows more than I do." He's survived 10 summers with that phrase alone. And then there's you. You who think perhaps you could be different. Smarter. Slipperier. You'd watch your words, you'd keep your head down, you'd survive. But you wouldn't, because even if you never said a word, your face would betray you. Your body would flinch. Your eyes would roll. And someone would see it. They'd whisper, they'd smirk, they'd set it in motion. And soon you'd find yourself in the square, tied to a post, listening as a man in robes explains how mercy requires punishment. The crowd would nod, not out of cruelty, but out of fear, because they know next time it could be them. So, no, you wouldn't last a day here, not because of plague, not because of hunger, not even because of knives, but because in the medieval market of Ávila, words have teeth, and silence has chains. Right, let's not kid ourselves. You've heard the tale now. 12 chapters of filth, fear, rot and rules. And after all that, if you're still thinking, well, that's just how things were back then I'm sorry, mate, but you've missed the bleeding point. Because what's truly sickening about medieval Ávila wasn't the fleas, or the mouldy bread, or even the stabbings behind the tavern. Nah. It was the silence. The constant, choking, weaponized silence. People weren't just poor, they were gagged. Every look, every laugh, every sneeze could land you in the stocks or face down in a ditch. And half the time it wasn't even the crime, it was the vibe they punished. You could starve in public and they'd call it divine will. You'd get beat half to death and still be told it was your fault for not keeping your head down. The church? Don't get me started. Preaching purity while the priests downed wine and whispered sin in dark corners. It wasn't faith, it was fear wearing a robe. Now here's the kicker. None of it was accidental. The whole system was designed like a game of bloody Jenga. Keep everyone scared, keep 'em hungry, and most importantly, keep 'em apart. Distrust was the default setting. Gossip wasn't just a pastime, it was survival. Snitch or suffer. Smile wrong, and someone would remember. But if we were there, knowing what we know now, we wouldn't just rot in silence, would we? No, mate. We'd use the system against itself. First off, information would be our sharpest blade, not just collecting secrets, but controlling when and how they spread. Whisper a lie to protect yourself? Nah. We'd whisper the truth, but dress so sweetly no one would spot the poison until it bloomed. Call it strategic honesty. Slip truths into jokes, praise with daggers hidden in the compliments. You learn fast in Ávila, no one ever kills the jester. Just don't get too clever, play the fool, but keep your eyes wide. Second, we'd weaponize kindness, not that sugary, saintly nonsense. I'm talking practical loyalty. Build trust where it counts, feed a kid when no one's looking, patch a rival's boot, protect someone when they've been marked. In a world like that, kindness is so rare it's bloody unforgettable. People remember who gave them shelter when the church offered chains. And lastly, don't fight the rules. Bend them, twist them, make them yours. Speak only when it serves you. Listen always. Nod, smile, and take notes. If the system says you can't speak out, then learn to speak around. Use metaphor, use song, use bloody bread if you must. Just get the message across. See, survival in Ávila wasn't just about grit. It was about wit. And sadly, most folk never got the chance to learn it. So no, it wasn't just a hard life, it was an engineered one, cruel by design. But if you give the people tools, knowledge, and just a little hope, they don't just survive, they revolt.